Hello, my friends. Thanks for coming to play with the ideas that I present on my channel, particularly with this meditation that I did on the Christ consciousness way back in 1987. I've been reluctant to share it, but a comment on the channel encouraged me. The information started, Christ was not a single individual, but a phenomena that several men enacted. John the Baptist was the walker among men. He was the miracle worker. It was actually St. Paul that was crucified. John the Baptist said, I also ascended, but his death was very obscure to the whole story. John the Baptist said, I am the Christ in your pictures and statues, but I am not the Christ on the cross. He said, our teaching, and he said, our, because there were more than one of us here to create the dynamic of the Christ. Our teachings were agreed upon to bring into the human species at that particular time and place in history. The importance of the teaching lay in a completely different approach to fellow man and did emphasize that this extended to all creatures on the planet as well, although that was eradicated from the teaching. We sought to bring the perception of unity, of kindness, and caring for all living things. We tried to bring this to the species consciousness. Some of the original teachings do remain and still remain in a true historical sense, if one cares to travel back to discover what was really meant by those teachings. The main characteristic of the teaching was gentleness, generosity, and the goodness that needed to be brought to the people of that time. The people at that time treated each other as chattels, as objects, and not even humans were considered fellow beings. The people who distilled this information were products of their own time and culture and were not as forward-thinking or expanded as the group that actuated the parables and the teaching of that time. So much of it was lost. John the Baptist says there were several of us there, and we each contributed along certain lines and avenues. Paul or Saul he taught the application of Christianity to the particular lifestyle that would be assumed if they embraced these teachings. He said that there were some apostles that entered the phenomena of Christ fairly close to the death of the original 3 to 4 participants in the Christ life story. These later apostles were charged with the organization and teaching and caring for the teachings. So they had a lot of meetings about what in the teachings would be emphasized. You have to remember that there was almost no recorded history at that time. It was an oral tradition. And so these later apostles did a lot of talking amongst themselves as to what the major tenets of the teaching would be. There was some recording of the Gospels much later on, and not by the original people. And he said that John and Mark are the two versions of the Gospel that are closer to the truth. These writings occurred hundreds and hundreds of years after and were taken from the oral tradition. And so by then, all of the lives of the participants had been merged into one, and this life was called Christ. He wanted to talk about the importance of the teaching that came in called sacrifice into Christianity. Sacrifice is a trade, but you have to remember at the time that the Christ drama took place, currency had much less of a place in their life. Bartering was how they traded goods and commodity. One thing was traded for something else, like a daughter would be traded for a cow. Humans were things, they were objects. There was no sense of unity in terms of the concept of the sameness of all life. And so, this concept of sacrifice, which was so strong in the culture at that time, entered the Christ teaching. It was a cultural interpretation of the teaching and should really not be emphasized. It took hundreds of years for the populations of these early Christians to increase to the point where they could even be open and conversant about their beliefs, their faith. When there was finally enough people to record their beliefs, that was also part of the plan and the understanding of the prophets who introduced this change in spiritual attitude. So the sacrifice of Christ on the cross should be taken as an interpretation, as the cultural bias of the time, but also not any integral part of the teaching. So I think I'm going to stop this here for today. I am going to do another video at least from this meditation. So until I see you again, please be well and please be blessed.